one of the true heroes in human spaceflight operations, Ray J. Johnson. I'm not going to read your whole deal there, Ray J. Ray J is truly my hero, a real pilot, a naval aviator, a test pilot, clearly one of the best pilots I know. He was crazy enough to let me have the stick for most of those minuscule hours that you just heard about. Ray J was on the last Hubble Space Telescope mission, STS-125, launched back in May of 2009, and it was the fifth and final mission to the Hubble Space Telescope. So our goal here today is just for me and for Ray J and I to talk back and forth, and we'll talk, and I'll interview Ray J, and it'll be basically, we'll be going through the process, the plan, train, fly elements of human space flight, the way we did it at NASA. So with that, Ray J, did you have any introductory comments you wanted to add to that?
No, I enjoyed flying with you on the T-38 BK and the WB actually. So yeah, all good. Really enjoyed flying my entire career, except for a couple years at Blue Origin. So yep, it was an honor to be a part of the STS-125 mission.
Well, so tell us first off, how were you notified? You know, how did you get the message? Hey, Ray J, this was clearly your first assignment. How did that work out for you?
Yeah, you know, the way that goes is they invite you into the front office of the chief astronaut, and he basically says something like, "Well, you know, are you willing to go on the STS-125 servicing mission 4 mission?" And I said, absolutely. You know, I'll train as hard as I can. And I was really proud to be asked. The mission was interesting in that it was originally canceled by the administrator of NASA at the time, and then reinstated by a brand new administrator 2 years later. And it was all due to the risk of the mission. So my wife asked me, well, what did you think about being on the 125 mission? And I told her, yeah, this is the best mission, partly because it gave back to humanity. You know, no slight on the International Space Station, but this was true science. And then partly because it was the riskiest mission NASA had ever flown. So it was those two reasons I thought was worthwhile.
So who were your crewmates on the mission? Clearly, I know all of these people. I just love them to death. But this setting Ray J up to talk about these fine folks.
Yeah, so the commander was Scott Altman, goes by Scooter. He flew some of the scenes in Top Gun. Great pilot. He had flown before on a Hubble mission and also space station, so he was pretty experienced. I was his pilot for the mission. And then we had Megan MacArthur, who's currently on the space station as we speak, circling the Earth. And by the way, comes over Seattle pretty darn regularly. So you see her, and me and one of my crewmates, Mike Good, we'll get together and watch Megan overfly Seattle. So so Megan was mission specialist 2. Then we had Mike Good, who was mission specialist 1, or sat behind me on ascent. Mike was an Air Force officer, test pilot graduate at Edwards, as I was, and then was on his first mission as an EVA crew member, followed up by John Grunsfeld, who was the most experienced Hubble crew member we had. John was an astronomer, PhD, and so really sharp on Hubble and knew everybody at Goddard where we trained, did a lot of our training. Then we had Drew Feustel on his first flight, who eventually flew on the space station, and he was on his first EVA first flight. Drew is a PhD in geology. Megan, by the way, had a PhD in oceanography, so pretty qualified. And then Mike Massimino had 6 degrees, including a PhD. So all good folks, highly qualified, and a fun team to be a part of.
Yeah, what a great crew. So, in a broad sense, what were the overall mission objectives of the fifth Hubble Space Telescope repair mission?
So there were too many objectives. Let's just say that initially. So many objectives because it was the last mission to Hubble, that the administrator of NASA put a consultant at the time to monitor our trainings and make an assessment of whether we as a crew were oversubscribed. And that individual was Charlie Bolden, who became the administrator of NASA later, who was a former pilot on a Hubble mission. So I like to say that Charlie and I were pilots on a Hubble mission, so I could therefore be the administrator, but somehow that didn't turn out. And so his report was the crew is maxed out, but why don't we let the crew do what the crew does best, which is figure it out in the air and see if they can get it all done. So there were 5 back-to-back EVAs, and the highlights were to replace wide field camera 2 with wide field camera 3, replace a science instrument and command and data handling box, 3 RSUs, gyroscopes, batteries, cosmic origin spectrograph, which is a brand new instrument, and then repair advanced camera for surveys, and then repair the Space Telescope imaging spectrograph. Also put on batteries and new blankets. And finally, we added a docking mechanism to the bottom of Hubble. So someday a rocket could rendezvous with Hubble and then deorbit it, because the telescope, the size of a bus, will make it through the atmosphere, and you never know where it's going to land. So that's the idea.
Yeah, what a tremendous undertaking and challenging mission. And there was a lot of unique aspects to the HST mission, altitude, rendezvous, proximity operations. Can you elaborate a little bit more? What was unique about this mission compared
Yeah,
to a standard shuttle mission?
I think so. The first uniqueness was Hubble is as high as you can go in the space shuttle and get home. So what that means is the orbital maneuvering engine is burned, and you burn half of your fuel getting up to the orbital altitude, which is about 100 miles above the space station. So 354 statute miles above the Earth. So the first thing is it's way up there. The second part is it's at an inclination of 28.5 degrees to the equator, and the space station's at 51.6. So people from the space station can't somehow come and rescue you, and you can't somehow get to the space station. So the unique part of that was that they had to have a second space shuttle on the pad with a minimum crew of 3 people who would come up, and we'd lock robotic arms together, and then we'd shinny down these robotic arms in spacesuits to the other non-injured space shuttle. So that's what made the mission especially dangerous, in that it was not only up higher, but we had no way to easily get rescued. So
Yeah. We'll cover a little bit more for the folks what your duties were as the PLT or the shuttle pilot on the HST mission.
So the pilot and the commander are charged with ascent and entry, particularly on ascent. My duties, I used to say that the commander took care of the air conditioning, but it's a little more than that. He has the main computers. He does have the environmental control system, but on my side, I control the main engines, the 3 shuttle main engines, the reaction control system, the orbital maneuvering system, the fuel cells, and then the auxiliary power unit. So we used to say that the pilot can really screw things up, and it really can be bad. And then on entry, that's pretty much my burn with the OHMS engines, to make sure that we burn the correct amount of time, slow down just the right amount of speed so that we can bite into the atmosphere and re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. So that was kind of it. I also, as a sidelight, ran the IMAX camera, which is part of the IMAX Hubble 3D mission, which I tell people in some cases was more stressful than just the actual launch, because you were filming missions with a mile of film that either you took a good picture or you didn't take a good picture. And the reason that's important is that in space, the amount of light that's changing, the f-stop of the camera is constantly changing. So you have to adjust that within about 5 seconds of when you take the picture. And I was pretty proud that of the 25 or so pictures I took, 23 made the movie. So there you go.
Absolutely. There was a lot of intense pressure on the IMAX film coming out good, so to speak. So, you know, Ray J and I together ran flight operations, which was planning and training and flying all of these human spaceflight missions. So cover for the folks, you know, where and how and where and when you trained. Cover things like spaceflight readiness training, T-38s, the shuttle training aircraft, the motion-based simulator, emergency procedures, EVA support, and so forth. Just kind of give the folks a picture of what it was like to do that training and where you did it.
So you mentioned spaceflight readiness training. That's in our supersonic T-38. The time NASA had about 20 of them. And interestingly enough, I was assigned to this mission after Michael Griffin, the administrator, added it on, and it turned out to be Halloween of 2006. He announced the mission along with the crew. Obviously, we knew it a couple days before, but not very far before. There was a big announcement, and it was a big deal because Barbara Mikulski, Senator Mikulski, really wanted the mission to go, and so the mission was added on because Griffin had worked on Hubble in his earlier years, so he thought it was important enough. And that's kicked off just under 3 years of training. We October of 06, and then we landed mid or late May of 09. So I got that confused with when I actually got married, which was 08. So 09, and so we were 2 years and 9 months of training, and it started out with spaceflight readiness training in the T-38. We became a crew. We also did National Outdoor Leadership School in Alaska, where we worked about, I think we were in the wilderness for 8 days, and it was a kayaking trip, which generally sounds fun, but not if you have to kayak 11 miles a day. And it was really good training for the crew to get bonded as a crew, and also just to see people under stress, because we had National Outdoor Leadership School instructors with us, and they were designing a course that was stressful. And I saw stress come out. There was no question about that. And so that was a really excellent opportunity, one that I thought really helped us as a crew. We also had this 6 degree of freedom motion-based simulator, and at certain periods of time, you'd get in your spacesuit and get in the simulator, and then the simulator rotate to not quite 90 degrees nose high, but it was far enough that you felt like everything you knew was falling out of your ears when you were on your back. And so then we do the launch and entries in the motion-based simulator. So that was really useful. And when we did have a couple of problems on the ascent, the motion-based sim really took effect, and we knew exactly what to do. And then we had a fixed base simulator where we practiced the rendezvous with Hubble and the grapple of Hubble and bring it into the payload bay of the space shuttle. And I think Wayne Hale, who's kind of a famous flight director at NASA and then shuttle program manager, kind of said it best that, you know, the shuttle bay of the space shuttle was designed, they designed Hubble to fit in exactly in that shuttle bay, not really much else room. So, so it was kind of the crown jewel of the shuttle program, is to do 5 servicing missions of Hubble.
Well, talk a little bit more. You mentioned simulations, and talk about your sim soups and emergency procedures and MALs and what you went through and how simple that really was.
So the simulator supervisor was, I'd say she was evil. I mean, she thought up scenarios to the point where when one system would fail, you were saying, well, if this other system fails, you lose a significant amount of redundancy. And we usually typically on Ascent had about 8 emergencies, and they all didn't go well. I can say that I never screwed up the main engines, thank God, because that's pretty catastrophic. But on one simulation, it was a test for the auxiliary power unit guy, and they had problems on all 3 APUs. And on one simulation, I ended up having no APUs running, which is loss of the vehicle. And you feel like in the motion-based sim, you feel like you've just failed your crew member and you've killed everybody. It really is pretty realistic. And so and the debriefs were pretty matter of fact. It was like, and on the APU, I can remember Leroy Kane saying, "So Ray J, what happened there?" And you know, all you could say is, I got the wrong switch. I threw the wrong switch to cool down an APU, and I should not have touched that switch. So, but that's how we got better, and it was really good training for not only mission control but the flight crew. And thank God, you know, in mission control, the flight director is debriefing his crew right there. You're within a stone's throw of the flight director, and he can wield some pretty difficult comments. At least the air crew was in a different building in a motion-based sim. You know, he couldn't come in and smack us. So, but we all learned as a team, and I thought it was outstanding training.
Yeah, excellent team, outstanding training. Talk a little bit about TCDT and let the folks know what that was like and what you went through.
Yeah, so that's called terminal countdown test, and this is, and many times in NASA they wanted to just drop this test, like, hey, it's not worth it. You know, these are managers, not operators, and you know, why do I have to waste 3 or 4 days of training time? But it turns out it was a complete rundown for both the ground crew at the Kennedy Space Center and the flight crew to go through all the procedures from, you know, walking out of quarantine there in the astronaut center, and then getting in the vehicle and going out to the astronaut van and going out to the pad and practicing every single one of those steps. And I thought it was invaluable, and NASA never canceled that test, although I know there were plenty of times they wanted to do that.
Yeah, we fought hard to maintain all of that kind of activity. So there was a close call on the STA. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Sure. So I don't think I explained part of my training as a pilot and Scooter's training as a commander was to do dives in the shuttle training aircraft. And that's a highly modified Gulfstream II that allows us to do the dives that the space shuttle is at when it comes into land, which is a 20-degree dive, 300-knot descent, and you're literally falling like a rock. and then you have to round that out and touch down less than 6 feet per second. And so I had about 500 dives when I flew, and a scooter had about 1,000. And that was done at both the Kennedy Space Center and Edwards Air Force Base, which is an alternate landing spot, along with White Sands, which is another alternate landing spot. So on one of the dives at night, I was in my spacesuit. They would typically, sometimes put you in your spacesuit, and sometimes not. I think this time I wasn't in the dive, and we almost hit a Cessna 172 that flew right by in front of us. So you can imagine 300 knots hitting another airplane. That'd be the end of both of us. So it was close, and it highlighted that there was not radar control over the Kennedy Space Center, and then we adjusted the protocol there to get a radar and to get control. After, I think that was maybe my third or fourth dive, the instructor and I both agreed we probably need to just go land and talk about what just happened. So close call. I had plenty of those in aviation, of a little under 12,000 hours of flying, but that was certainly, I hadn't been close in a midair in maybe 20 years. So this was a close one.
So down at the Cape, there's some unique training, egress training from the tower, and various procedures at the launch site, and armored vehicle training. Yeah, talk just a teeny bit about that.
Yeah, so once you, there's a closeout crew. Crew member number 2 is the astronaut, and there's 6 people on the closeout crew, and they load you into the vehicle, they close the hatch, and they get off the pad. It's not with that much hydrogen in the vehicle. A hydrogen leak can overwhelm the crew pretty quickly. So we practice an emergency egress off the pad, and then when we come off the access arm to open the hatch, come off the access arm, turn on a water suppression system, and then we would get in these baskets and ride a slide wire down to the ground, and then on that slide wire, then once you do that, you get out of the basket, which requires help, at least in my case. If you're not real heavy, the basket's not near the ground, and then you get in an armored vehicle and you drive away. So all that was kind of cool training. Hopefully you didn't ever have to use it, but NASA had thought of pretty much everything. So it was good training.
There's quite a bit that goes on in the run up to launch, but talk about when you arrived at KSC and the prep for launch, and the days just prior to launch, and where you stayed in crew quarters, and what you did, and the readiness, and how you got the thumbs up for launch.
So we, well, first of all, we launched on time, which made everybody happy who came down, your family. The crew goes into quarantine somewhere around L-5. And then the pilot and commander do some very last minute hand-eye coordination of STA dives. So those get accomplished. And so we all get into crew quarters. At night, we typically were watching a few movies. So that was always nice to do and bond as a crew. And then for the morning, you got up early, you had a pretty big breakfast. I'm not sure that was a good plan. I think not having a lot to eat would have been a little bit better. And then you get in your spacesuits and you head out to the pad. And you arrive at the pad somewhere around 3 hours prior. I think I was in my seat about 2.5 hours prior. And you're there with very few people, a few fire people and the closeout crew. And their job is to lift you into the your seat, which is horizontal now. The vehicle's on its nose and nose high, so they have to get you into your seat, which is not too hard for me, but it was a little bit more challenging for Scooter. And then you start your countdown, which occurs, a couple hours, 2.5 hours prior. And there's not too much to do in that. There's comm checks. But it really starts to get interesting about 5 minutes and 15 seconds where the pilot starts the APUs. So you get those going. You know, my personal opinion was once I got the APUs done, it should have been a piece of cake. I didn't have anything specifically to do unless there was something wrong. And then we did have a major malfunction at liftoff plus 0.1 seconds. So.
Well, talk about that, Ray J. So the solid rocket boosters, everything gets lit. You're taking off. What was your experiences like? Your feelings? The quick response to the issue at hand.
Yeah. So the Atlantis had gotten a partial look at its wiring on STS-93. There had been a short. That was a pretty serious short just prior to main engine cutoff with Jeff Bashby and crew. And so the vehicles got inspected for any wiring shorts, but Atlantis didn't get the entire vehicle selected when it launched. So we had a flight control system circuit breaker pop on as soon as the solids lit. And what probably the biggest lesson learned for me is that nobody warned me how much shaking there was when the solids lit. So these things are over 3 million pounds of thrust each. And once they light, they can't be unlit. And also once they light, you're going to become an astronaut one way or the other. So they lit, they caused a tremendous amount of vibration. We had a short, it kicked off the flight control channel. When I was shaking as SRBs are lighting, I'm shaking inside my helmet and I'm trying to look at the 11 screens in front of me to find out what's gone wrong because there was a major alarm in your headset. It wasn't a fire or loss of cabin pressure, but it was the next serious class 2 alarm. So I finally could focus and I looked at it and I go, oh, this is what I thought to myself. That's the commander's problem. I didn't have any action to this problem. He has to do all the work. Of course, it's all of our problem if we have a real problem. So he and Megan worked through the flight control channel short. And then we started to launch as we kind of went through max dynamic pressure. The engines started to throttle back, which they do right before you get to max dynamic pressure. And the left engine was showing signs of quitting. And then I really did tense up on that one because if the left engine quit at that moment in time, you would have to execute what's called a return to launch site. Never flown before, never executed before by any crew. We practiced it, of course. And so I thought, wow, we're going to have to do an RTLS, return to launch site, and I'm going to still be an astronaut. But I mean, just in the split second of time, I think it took mission control maybe 3 seconds to say, okay, no, that's not a real engine failure. That's a deucer problem, transducer problem. But they had trained us to look at some of these other indications. And so that's what was showing to be bad. The Mike Good, who sat behind me on Ascent, thought the same thing. We both thought this is it. We're going to fly at RTLS. But anyway, after that, I was pretty tense all the way to main engine cutoff because 2 things had gone astray.
Well, very professional team, both on the ground and in the spaceship. So space adaptation, how did that work for you and your crewmates once you got on orbit?
Lots of us didn't feel well, and I'll just say myself included. The flight crew, which included Scooter, myself, and Megan, were not allowed to take pills. Medicine so that you didn't get sick. And that was because if we couldn't be drugged up if we had to land in Spain, right, for example. So I think the majority of the crew got sick but it was just a one-time affair.
Yeah.
I was also the crew medical officer, so everybody would get a shot essentially in their butt, and then you'd feel better after that. And after one day, everybody felt great.
Yeah. Okay, so now you're on orbit, you're past the adaptation stage, and now you're getting ready for a rendezvous with the HST. So what was that like? How was it? What were the unique aspects, and what were your challenges?
The cool part of that is I sat in the commander's seat, and I did activated the reaction control system from his seat. So it's my chance to play commander. And I think somebody took a picture of me in that seat. And Scooter was in the back looking vertically as we came up from below to get right next to Hubble. What I recall is as we got closer and closer to Hubble, it turned out to be out of attitude. So we were supposed to come up just parallel like this, and Mega to get the robotic arm and pull it into the bay. Instead, when we came up, it was slanted. And Scooter goes, "Hey, Ray J, it's not in attitude." I go, "What are you like kidding me here? It's got to be in attitude. How many people on the ground are in charge of making sure that Hubble was in the correct attitude?" But it wasn't. It was in the wrong attitude. And so we did a pitch yaw and roll maneuver to line up with it, which cost us some reaction control jet power. But it turns out the night prior, they were still using Hubble to look at the universe, and they never got it back in attitude. And so, yeah, that was just added stress. The Scooter did the correct maneuver, which was designed by Ken Bowersox, a former astronaut, Hubble astronaut. And then we got right next to Hubble, and Megan just reached out with a robotic arm and snatched it. And then we stuck it into the payload bay vertically in the payload bay on a big platter, and we were off and running.
Okay, so now it's surgery time on HST. So kind of go through the EVAs and what was done in each day. How kind of, just in a general sense from a PLT's perspective, what those challenges were like for our EVA crew members.
Yeah, so unlike the space station, Hubble did 5 back-to-back EVAs. So on the space station, if you did 3 EVAs, you would do 1 EVA, 2 days off, 1 EVA, 2 days off, 1 EVA. We did EVA to EVA to EVA, all 5 in a row. And the reason for that was that our fuel cells were providing the power to power Hubble. So Hubble wasn't generating its own power, and we were providing the power. So the amount of oxygen we had to breathe was being used up by Hubble, and that made the mission just under 13 days. And so we were going to be short on power. So we had to do these EVAs back to back. And every single EVA went over the 6.5 hours timeline, 1 over 8 hours, which put us every day behind for the next day. So it was a fairly exhausting mission. In fact, I had a sleep watch that I wore on orbit, and it showed I got about 5 hours and 15 minutes of sleep for 13 days. And that's under what I need. I need at least 7 at the time. We were all in very good shape, but we didn't get much sleep. So each EVA had their own huge challenges. On wide field camera 3, which was EVA 1, you took out this piano-sized camera, and it turns out the bolt that gets it out of its bay is torqued too tight. And so when we went to the normal torque, and then we were allowed to use a higher torque, essentially after that, the last thing was a breaker bar, so that we could just break it free. And the reason this is important is that if you break that bolt, then the camera is stuck in there. So you can get the camera stuck where it doesn't work. Just a bunch of badness can happen. But anyway, we Drew broke it free, and we did the wide field. That was mainly EVA 1. The next one was EVA 2, was a different set of spacewalkers, was 3 rate sensor units. And some of the tallest, well, let me just say this, everybody was taller than me on the mission, but some really tall guys charged to get inside and change these rate sensor unit. And turned out one of them would never fit. It was manufactured so it wouldn't fit. And it almost wore out Mike Good Bueno. And so he eventually said, it's not going to work. This isn't working. So they got a replacement RSU in the very back of the vehicle, stored, a rebuilt RSU, not a new one. And we got them all in. And then at that point, it was a really difficult decision to decide to go after the batteries. So I could tell Mike Good was pretty tired first EVA, and but MCC made the decision to go for the batteries, which is a little aggressive, because if you don't get the batteries in, then Hubble doesn't get power, internal power at least, to keep the heaters on. So we did the batteries. That the third EVA was called the Cosmic Origin Spectrograph. The reason this is important is it was the most powerful spectrograph ever flown in space. So it was really a big deal, and it replaced the corrective optics. And the fourth one was, it's called STIS, Space Telescope Imaging Spectrograph. Basically, John Grunsfeld removed 100 screws. Maybe it was Massimino, but anyway, it was 100 screws, and got the spectrograph fixed, essentially doing circuit card repair. So it was a pretty big deal. That was very stressful because a handrail wouldn't come off. It got stripped, and Massimino actually had to break it off in flight. So during these EVAs, I was either taking some IMAX or taking care of Atlantis, because it had things you had to do both with the fuel cells. You had to do keep the vehicle in attitude. And then the final one was fine guidance sensor that we did. And it turned out that we were going to add some blankets, but we were out of time. So the night before, as a crew, we got together and said, we're going to wake up an hour early and get these blankets on and finish the entire mission as planned. And so I remember we started into EVA prep when it was not the right MCC Capcom crew member in place. And we were about an hour early, and they could tell we were awake because you can see current, you can see the current that charged with a waste contamination system. So they knew we had awoken early, and we got the whole mission done. I was pretty proud of the crew to meet as a group and get the final blankets on, which had been taken up twice before and never accomplished.
Yeah, what an outstanding mission. We'll talk now about ungrapple, departure, and then ultimately entry prep and landing.
Yeah, so ungrapple was, we got in position. Megan let Hubble go free. There's a whole checklist Scooter and I went through with the mechanism on board the space shuttle. But then we let it free, and it started to float away. Everybody was on the flight deck, and there's a pretty famous picture of all of us floating. I was doing burns, and Scooter was doing a burn to get away from Hubble. It was really pretty big deal for the EVA crew members, because essentially they were done. Done all the EVAs. And by the way, every one of these things went long, so everybody was tired, and nobody got out of their spacesuit and just, sat in the corner and ate or something. Everybody was working. So it was a pretty big deal. But even the more important part of it is, in order to make the mission with odds less than loss of crew in 1 in 100, we had to deorbit do an elliptical deorbit burn, so we get in a highly elliptical orbit. So when we're at 354 miles up, and then down at 150 miles and 354. And the reason we did that is because the Chinese had blown up a satellite, and the debris from that satellite at 500 statute miles up had drifted into our area. So to lower our risk, we ended up doing a burn immediately within an hour of letting Hubble go. So, but it was pretty memorable time to see that. And there's a famous picture of the last picture we ever took of Hubble.
Yeah, that's awesome. So landing, how was it coming in? Compare it to your training and preparation, and ultimately egress to the CTV and saying howdy to everybody back on Earth.
Yeah, so on the day of landing, the weather was bad at the Kennedy Space Center, so we waved off. And now at this point, my wife's at the Kennedy Space Center. It's as an aside, my son is at Edwards Air Force Base going through test pilot school with my 2 grandchildren. And so we wave off that first night. Well, there's not a night and day because you're going around the Earth every 90 minutes. But we watched a movie, which was Apollo 13 Stranded in Space. So that was a pretty good movie to watch. And then we set up for deorbit the next day. The next day, the weather was bad also. And so that night we watched the brand new Star Wars movie. I don't remember the name of it, but one that had not been released to the ground, but it was released to NASA. NASA had a deal where Hollywood gave them movies early. So we watched that one. And then the next day we had to come down because we were running out of oxygen and power, so we deorbited to Edwards Air Force Base. And so I'm sure my wife was pretty disappointed because she was in the wrong spot. And so we deorbited to Edwards. And as we went over the Hawaiian Islands, I remember looking down going, wow, not only are we going fast, we're pretty high up going fast. And then we got over LA at about 5 times the speed of sound. I looked down and it was, I told myself I shouldn't be looking. I should be looking at, all the screens. I would say in the deorbit burn that there's a cue card in the deorbit burn. It's got maybe 30 items on it. And you have to do these things exactly. And if anything else goes wrong in Atlantis, you don't address it until the burn is off, because if you don't burn long enough, you won't get into the atmosphere. You'll skip off the atmosphere, and you won't necessarily make it back to Earth. Or if you burn too long, you'll get too deep into the atmosphere. You could land short or you could land long, if you will. And so we did have an emergency in the middle of the burn. And I remember Megan saying, Ray J, there's an APU alarm. And I told Megan, which is exactly the way I was trained, hey, Megan, we're on the cue card, and I'll get to that later. And so we got to that later, and it was just a pressure alarm. But we came into Edwards, and I looked down at the runway, and I thought, there's no way this is going to work. I mean, we're way too high and way too close to the runway for this to even be exact. But we just followed our cue. Scooter let me fly for about 30 seconds, and I felt really good. Being a short person, the distance between your heart and your brain is short, and so as you're readapting to the force of gravity, it really wasn't a big deal for me. And then Scooter and I planned it to touch down at 200 knots at 30 feet across the threshold, and he came in at 199 and 29 feet, I believe. So right on the money, touchdown, put the chute out, and we stopped on the runway. And that was pretty memorable. Getting out of the vehicle, now you are starting to feel a little bad because you can get your inner ear can get aggravated. But they helped you out. And I just remember coming down the ladder, and there were a bunch of Air Force people there. and one guy put his hand out to, and he kind of pulled me forward, and you're just not very stable. So I was like, dude, you need to not do this. And so then we all walked around the vehicle and got in the CTV, and the rest was history. I did get to see my son and my 2 grandchildren after a medical exam. They did a full medical exam to make sure you're not dehydrated. I think one of us had to get some fluids, but in general, it went really well. And the return to Houston. So now my wife is going like, oh my God, we got to get back to Houston. So they flew the spouses back to Houston. And then we had landed, we got a physical, and then they allowed us to take a shower, which by the way is a bad idea to do anything alone.
Yeah.
It's just, you could, I remember dropping my soap in a shower alone going, oh, this is going to be bad, because
Yeah.
you can't look down, you got to look there. And then anyway, it all worked out. We got on the SDA, which is a shuttle training aircraft, and came home. I'm not sure that was completely allowed by NASA, NASA flight operation, or, you know, your position, BK. But my wife just barely made it to Ellington when we landed, and then we got reunited with our families.
Yeah, what a great mission. I think Rob, Sonny, now is probably a good time to open up for questions from folks that are involved. And while we're preparing for that, I just want to highlight, in flight operations, we say a couple of things: tough and competent. And you just heard from one of the toughest, most competent pilots in NASA's arsenal. And not only that, just a genuinely great human being and a dear friend, and a great leader, by the way. So Ray J, I really appreciate that. So what kind of questions do we got?
So Rob, I'll let you and Amelia handle the questions. I just want to say, thank you, BK and Ray J, for coming in and being willing to do this. It's always a pleasure to hear this kind of dynamic, especially between you two, right? Because of the special history that you guys have. And it's neat to kind of just live through your story, Ray J, as you're kind of talking about all the things that you went through. And it's nice to get that intimate relaying of the things that you lived through. And thanks for being so transparent about those things. I think all the people that are listening today, I think this is a special thing for them to be a part of. So anyway, I just want to say thanks for that. And at this, I'll kind of hand the microphone back over to Rob and Amelia, looking for some of the questions in the Q&A. So
thanks, Sonny. Yeah, there's a couple in there. I'll alternate with Amelia. The first one is from Chris. I don't know, Cristobal, if you want to maybe rephrase that. I'm trying to figure out exactly what the question is you're making, but rephrase it and we'll have a go with that in a minute. But the next one is from Neil. And he mentions, with the recent Hubble trouble, what do you think about the current lack of human servicing capability, thinking of the James Webb telescope?
Yeah, that's important. So Hubble was designed to be serviced. James Webb wasn't. It does have a docking mechanism. I think it's the beauty of Hubble was only designed to maybe be good for 10 years, launched in 1990. Actually, the day after I joined NASA, it launched when I was a test pilot for NASA. Nobody thought it would go this long. And it's really to the credit of this Science Telescope Institute to keep it going. But the lack of servicing, even handrails, even a few things, even though James Webb is just under 1 million miles away, it's still possible. So I think we probably should put servicing on every mission, at least at the highest level, the handhold, sharp edges, that kind of thing. So, I mean, in James Webb, they've tested it, so I feel good about that. But it has to unfurl and open up exactly. I mean,
Yeah. Just a comment on this one, Rob. This is interesting. The ops community. So the community that gets called in to save the day almost always says, hey, listen, plan for servicing, plan for contingencies, plan for human intervention, plan to get this, enable the human capability to come in and save the day. The tendency is the program people who tend to, monitor money and time and so forth, they push back on that because from their perspective, it tends to cost them time and money. So anyhow, back to you, Rob.
Okay, Amelia, do you want to do Chris? I think
Yeah,
I understand what he's saying now. Actually, I realise I've read it again. I can understand it, but I'll leave it to you then.
so the question is space silent, or is the environment similar to movies like Gravity and Interstellar?
So it's great. Yes, that. So inside the space shuttle, it's not silent. It's somewhere around 75 dB, and it's due to all the fans running. One of the biggest challenges of rockets and spaceships is expelling the heat. So that's one of the reasons that you have to open the Pele Bay doors. They have radiators on them, and you get the heat out of there. But yeah, you're running a bunch of things that are generating heat, especially 1970s technology, and it's got to go. So inside the space shuttle, no, it wasn't silent at all. Inside your spacesuit's a different story. That's fairly quiet, except for the comm between the crew members.
I think in the movie, absolutely silent on a couple of occasions, absolute for effect, for the movie's effect, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you have any other questions, you can either put them in the Q&A or the chat.
While we're waiting for questions to come in, I have one. Ray J, I've heard people talk about the overview effect, right? And you went through this this beautiful narrative of all the extremely busy activities, right? Were there moments for you where you were able to stop and look out the window and kind of absorb? And how did that feel for you?
So that effect is true. There's no question about it. So at Hubble altitudes of 350 miles, you can see somewhere around 1,600 miles through the horizon. So in the case of, in this elliptical pattern we were doing from space down towards Florida, as we went by Houston, if I looked to my left, I could see Lake Superior, which is around 1,500 miles away. So you can see a tremendous amount. Obviously, you see the curvature of the Earth, but you see a tremendous amount looking outside. I didn't have a lot of time to look outside. Just as a side light, my wife told me to try and get a picture of the Cayman Islands, which is where we were married, and so we could have a picture of the Cayman Islands from space. Yeah. And you're going 5 miles a second. So when you cross Central America, you better have a camera out knowing exactly what you're looking for. And I took a couple pictures and it turned out not to be the Cayman Islands. Now, there's Cuba and the Caymans are South Cuba, but there's an island that's pretty big south of Cuba, or the known big one, but it isn't in the shape of the Cayman Islands. So finally got a picture of the Cayman Islands. So that was kind of cool. But when you saw the Amazon and then you saw the Nile in one pass, it's pretty impactful. And so I can say that my original idea about recycling was more, okay, when recycling becomes economically viable, we ought to do it. That's not my vision now, and I think it's due to the overview effect. So things that you could see without the having to look through the atmosphere is, an order of magnitude more stars. You see the Southern Cross from up in space, which you can only see when my wife and I visited our daughter in New Zealand. We saw the Southern Cross, but you can see that from in space. Or Magellanic Clouds, it was unbelievable. And the fact that we had 2 days to look outside waiting for the weather to improve at Florida, which it didn't, really made it impactful. So yeah.
Cool. That's great. Thanks, Ray J.
Great. There's one here from Jeremy saying it's great hearing about the mission. He says extremely fascinating. So thanks for that. He would love to know what your thoughts are on the current commercial space efforts and the possibility of using them for missions such as servicing and maintenance, servicing, etc.
Yeah, having been a part of Blue Origin, I can tell you that the productivity in that company is extremely high. So I think NASA has no business not using the commercial companies. And if you've seen what SpaceX has managed to accomplish in roughly 20 years, it's unbelievable. And so, yeah, we'll have to use them, but you're going to have to watch them closely, obviously. And I think that's an absolute must for us to accomplish more goals in a shorter period of time.
Yes, agreed. Do you want to do the next one, Amelia? There you go.
Yes. So we have another question from Chris. Do scientists who go to the space station receive pilot training?
So it's an interesting evolution. In the past, NASA's past, in Apollo, we tried to give pilot training to non-pilots, if you will, and it was marginally effective. What we do now with spaceflight readiness training is we don't put them in the front seat of the T-38, but we allow them to do most of the activities that a pilot does from the front seat. The one being the one more challenging for pilots is formation, and obviously it took a couple hundred hours in me and the Navy to learn how to fly jets at high speed. So it's it wasn't our main focus to teach our mission specialists at the time how to fly. But yeah, many of them have at least private pilot license, and many of them have reasonably good in the T-38. I would say BK was reasonably good in the T-38.
We also sent some of the, in more recent years, would send some of our astronauts that were not military pilots or trained pilots off to get some T6 time. So they would go over and do some military training and fly up to the point of soloing, but it was typically less than 30 hours.
Yeah, and I'd say that over the years I've instructed at both commercial, civilian, in seaplanes, and then of course in the Navy, instructed in my aircraft type, and then at NASA in multiple aircraft types. And what flight instruction does for somebody who's becoming an operator is give them confidence. It's really, it's sort of like an Olympian, going out the first time. They don't necessarily have the total confidence that they would have on their second Olympics. And I think the flight instruction to the point of solo, where it's you and that's it, I think is very helpful for confidence building. And it also builds up that checklist mentality and the ability to just be trained. So I think is very helpful. And I've forgotten, BK, was that your idea or who the heck's idea was that? But it was a pretty good idea.
Okay, well, the next question is about the sickness. This is from Neil, was the initial sickness just due to zero G, and how long did it take to kick in? Wondering if the space tours in 5 minutes of zero G is likely to be risky or make people sick, I guess. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's not 5 minutes. It's more like 4 hours, 4 to 6 hours. So at the end of the day, let's see, we launched at around 2:30 Eastern. By the end of that day, I think that was 8 hours in our duty day. So yeah, it was 4 to 6 hours later, all the fluid in your body rises up, and you start to feel a little bit sick. And so I think the people who don't understand space flight, for example, the tourists on the Crew Dragon who will go around the Earth multiple times, there's going to be in the first 24 hours, people are not going to feel well, and that's okay, and you can get over it. But I think that's probably not well understood. So, but it isn't 5 minutes.
No.
Because I was at the Blue Origin first human flight in Texas, and when they got out of the vehicle, they were all fine, including the 82-year-old. So yeah.
Yeah, well defunct. I think that relates to the next question as well, Amelia. Almost same topic.
Well, firstly, they say thank you for sharing your experiences. What is your opinion on the recent developments of space tourism?
So I can only speak to my company, Blue Origin, and the purpose of doing that. The purpose of developing New Shepard, which is what Jeff Bezos and his brother and Oliver and Wally Funk went through, was to design a vehicle where you could land the first stage. So that was the whole idea. Yeah, there was, everybody wants a little bit of revenue, but it wasn't against some revenue marker, if you will. It was design a rocket. Then the designers on that vehicle, New Shepard, moved on to New Glenn to design a very big rocket. And so the goal was always to learn how to build, produce, and operate rockets. And then the space tourism will be a nice, it's good to get people into space. I think Jeff Bezos' idea has always been the more people you get into space, the more people will take care of Earth. And I like that idea. And I think the same is true for Richard Branson.
I'd like to comment very quickly. In general, I see this as very, very good for humanity. Now, I've personally been involved with the aftermath of 2 major spaceflight accidents and also a major first stage abort incident. And these are unbelievably traumatic events. Clearly, when there's loss of life, it's traumatic. Clearly, when you have a close call like a first stage abort off of a Soyuz vehicle, and you don't know for 10 or 20 minutes whether or not your folks are still alive, all of these things are extremely traumatic and impactful on the flight operations community. So the bottom line is for me to say here is this is a very, very serious business. Not for a second have we reached the stage where it's just like jumping into, United Airlines and flying around. I think that at some point in time, will be significantly safer. But at the same time, right now, you're dealing with unbelievably high temperatures, unbelievable pressures, unbelievable command and control systems, and unbelievably complex automated systems. So this is just to say that I'm a supporter, number one. Number two, I'm a believer in the notion of, hey, this is a very dangerous business. We need to be extremely serious about it. And then people that are stepping into this stage of the ballgame, we're in that transition stage. We have not made this just regular everyday life just yet, but I'm all for it. Glad to see it happening.
Okay, the next question from Sebastian. I suspect very much that you've heard this sort of question before. So what do you think is the best career path to become an astronaut?
I would say in the shuttle era, I took the pilot career path. But what you have to have, and I'll let BK answer this because he is actually in charge of selecting astronauts, and I was never on a panel, but you have to show you have operational skills. So whether that be scuba diving or, parachuting or, flying, you have to show that you've got that ability to do that. And then in whatever your chosen profession is, whether it be astronomy or science, physics, you have a demonstrated excellence in that area. So against others, you're one of the best. And so you should, I tell people, I just gave some advice to a guy who's in his final set of interviews. So he's getting real close. the goal here is you find your passion in life or what you really like to do, and so to speak. And so you do have to have operational skills. So I can't give you an area that's good. I do say that at least from the American perspective, NASA is academically oriented, so they like those degrees, if you will. Foreign language is going to be a must. In our era it was, learning Russian, which I can say I wasn't very good at. But I think all those areas, just a well-rounded individual with operational skills and excellence in whatever you've chosen to do in your life, whether it be oceanography or whatever.
Thank you. Off you go. Brian, do you want to answer that one now or follow that one up?
Well, just to add, I mean, Ray J did a great job. The data shows that the preponderance of our astronauts are test pilots from the Navy and the United States Air Force. Ray J hit on it. Anything that's measurable, be excellent. Get good grades. Do great in your flying. Do great. Be in the top of your class at test pilot school. In the space station era, it was being excellent in whatever area of study that you were involved in. And like Ray J said, the operational excellence. You have to demonstrate that you can perform under pressure. And you listen to Ray J today, you listen to what he went through, the types of training, it kind of highlighted what we were looking for. And I like to highlight three things that are even beyond that. What does the type of individual need to bring to the table? And it's a degree of humility, hungry to learn, and then being people savvy. So I like to add, humble, hungry, and people savvy. Be excellent in everything that you do. Demonstrate that operational excellence and capability and risk taking. But at the same time, recognizing that, hey, you don't know everything, you can learn a lot more, you can work with other people, you have that hunger to learn, and that you're savvy enough to understand and read other people. So all good stuff.
That sounds like a recipe for success in any sort of walk of life, really. So excellent, excellent response. Amelia, over to you then.
Okay, our next question is from Tim. What do you think of the new spacesuits, like the SpaceX ones, and how do they compare to the traditional ones that you used?
I don't know that I've been a fan of any spacesuit I've seen so far. So I didn't particularly like the Origin version or the Virgin Galactic or SpaceX. In fact, I just think, but they did put thought into it. So, Virgin partnered with Under Armour, Blue Origin partnered with a company to do it, and SpaceX, had people do it. They're kind of vertically integrated in their company, so highly a function CEO. But the spacesuits to go to the moon, they're going to have to be more flexible. One of the things that we had in our astronaut gym when we worked out were machines to increase our grip strength and forearm strength. And the reason for that is that you were fighting, doing an EVA, you could end up fighting the suit. You had to have very strong grip strength. And so, whatever we do in the future needs to be flexible as much as possible. And obviously still be an integrated, space vehicle in itself with communications and environmental control and everything else.
Thank you.
Aaron, do you have anything to add on?
Hey, cool is cool. So at the end of the day, the people are going to be looking for this kind of stuff, trying to one up, the next. I am definitely not the right person to ask. I'm all about functional capability and a little less at what it looks like. Although I've had a lot of people tell me they really liked them black and white SpaceX suits.
I would say, I would just add, the person who picked the suit for Blue Origin worked for me, and what I told her, and they were looking at, fitted suits, and I said, here's the reality of flight suits. People don't necessarily look good in a flight suit. So it's not the flight suit that's important, it's the patches. So if you have a Mach 3 plus patch, or you have a New Shepard patch, or you have whatever, those patches mean something, and so I thought that was important, because down in Texas in the summer, you don't want some tight fitting suit. It's hot down there, and that's true in any space vehicle anyway. So I don't know. I still, BK, I have to differ. I wasn't a big fan of SpaceX's, but I appreciated that they did it, that they put some effort into it, and they came up with their own. So that's cool.
Okay, there's a question here, for another one from Chris. He asks what your opinion are. This ties in exactly with what we've been talking about over the last few days about the future in space, and even as far as we've been talking about interstellar exploration, and what's the possibility of human exploration that far, and what the future might hold.
So let me say a couple things. I was asked by elementary kids, did I see aliens? So I'm going to just tell you right out, I didn't see any aliens. But the reason interstellar travel to me is important is because it's not to go to Mars. Actually, people go to Mars, or there's a big Mars effort, right? And exploration is great, and that's all good. Our founder of Blue Origin would say, going to Mars is like living on Mount Everest. I mean, it's not a fun place to be necessarily, but the fact that you did that feat spawned a whole bunch of science and importance. But the interstellar to me is to look at potential exoplanets that may be just as good as Earth. And so our founder at Blue Origin, his point was that you're never going to find anything better than Earth. And I don't know that I agree with that, but his point was, to have these gigantic space stations that are near Earth, and you put heavy servicing into the gigantic space stations, and you have light, manufacturing on Earth, and Earth is a place to go as a destination. So his point is pretty well taken, in that if you look at the expanse and requirement for energy of 7.8 billion people going up to, just under 10 billion people, at some point, we're going to start running out of energy, water, and everything else. So unless we control the population on Earth or do something, getting off Earth is going to be an important thing to consider, at least.
Yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts on this. And, my basic thought is dream big and do big. When you look back at what we were able to do from flying roughly 800 feet at Kitty Hawk, and then only 67 years later, putting two people on the surface of the moon, 250,000 miles away, and you look at where we're at technologically, where are we going to be 67 years from today? And the key is dream big and do big. It's this notion, and this is why we exist at the Limitless Space Institute. It's to inspire and educate others, to inspire and educate and motivate kids to be interested in interstellar travel, and then ultimately have folks like Dr. Sonny White research and develop enabling technologies. If you're not dreaming big, you're not going to do big. So all the folks listening to me, every day you get up, you should be dreaming big and doing big and thinking of what is the next thing that I can do, not just for myself, but for my family, for my neighborhood, for my country. How can I motivate others? How can I instill excellence in others? This is the value in what we stand for. And ultimately, this is how you create great Americans like Gregory J. Johnson. And this is how you create great missions like STS-125 servicing the Hubble Space Telescope. And then ultimately, we as a global community came together with more than a dozen nations and 6 international space agencies and put 1 million pounds of hardware over 200 miles in space and created the International Space Station. These are stepping stones that humanity in general needs to follow. That's my opinion. Those are my quick thoughts on this.
We have another question from Jeremy Lawson. Is there any advice that you have for people wanting to get their foot in the door in companies like Blue Origin, SpaceX, etc.?
To get positions at those companies?
Yes.
Killer grades. I mean, just lots of academic achievements and some of the best grades ever, so that you've shown excellence, at least in an academic setting, against others. Both companies hire really, really smart people.
Yeah, be excellent in measurables. At the end of the day, it's a number. You control what that number is going to be. You work, if you're putting in 40 hours of work a week at school, that number, that score is going to be higher. And just take this to the bank. Humble, hungry, people savvy. If you think about that in your everyday life, whether it's academics, whether it's your flying, or whether it's your preparation to go work for some of these wonderful places like Ray J has talked about, those things will help you along the way.
We have the same question, but for later on in your professional life.
Well, a couple of things I would add. BK is exactly right. Be humble. I think I interviewed for my job with BK, and he said, well, you know, what makes you qualified to do this? And I said, because I walk in a room and I don't think I'm the smartest person in the room. And so I'm going to listen to others. And when I listen to others and get others' opinions, I can make good decisions. And I have no idea if I got the job because of that. But later in life, I'd say, don't be afraid to take risks. So this one thing I have done in my life is taken a bunch of risks, but it was all, and I think BK would agree with this, it was all manageable risk, right? It was all known risk, mitigated risk in many cases, but it's still risky. But in just in your personal life, if you're weighed down by, you know, a bunch of belongings, and you can't go to the UK, or you can't go to, you know, move somewhere, you got to be able to be flexible and move. So, and then have a whole bunch of experiences. My, you know, one memory that, one quote that I've come up for myself is, you know, make a little money, make memories, not in that order. And the reason for that is that, you know, I never aimed my life at making any money, and hence I didn't make much money. But I think what I did make is a bunch of memories, you know, 12,000 hours of flying memories. And so lots of good stories, but a lot of good experience in a bunch of areas. So don't be afraid to take a chance, and don't be afraid to fail. So I think as astronauts, they're, you know, they will find something you're not good at. I mean, it was kind of amazing that, you know, in the Navy, you would compete against a bunch of pilots, and there were areas where you're good and areas where you weren't as good as others, but you already knew that about yourself. In some cases, the PhDs we hired, they had never failed at any single thing in their life. And when they failed or they didn't do well, it showed, and it showed to them, but they hadn't gone through those ups and downs of, you know, having an adversity and then overcoming the adversity. So that was a good lesson to learn how to fail before you can learn how to learn.
That's a good quote.
May I?
Question.
No more questions. I was just wondering, I just wanted to say to you, Ray J, that even in my 50s, visiting the Kennedy Visitor Center, I have sat open-mouthed in the theater watching the IMAX movies that are shown there with the servicing of the Hubble, and it is absolutely amazing photography and camera work. So well done on that, even at my age.
Do you have any advice for starting a space exploration company?
Okay.
Oh, wow. That's, and there are so many being started right now, you know, Rocket Lab, Astra, just you go on, Black Sky. There's coming out of the woodwork. I think you're going to have to know finances. You're going to have to know budgets. You're going to have to know, be able to get the funding source to build the rocket. And then I would just say, I like the SpaceX model that I've seen, which is Elon started out with a product that would make money. Like, if I design this product and it's like my design, I will make money with this product. And then he advanced that product and put in, you know, improvements, and then he built new products. But the first product was designed to make a little bit of money. So you have to know your market that you're aiming at, and then design a product that is competitive or more competitive for whatever reason. So I'll give you an example of a company called Relativity Space. They're 3D printing the rocket. Now, that's an interesting idea. And unfortunately, everything in a rocket doesn't lend itself to 3D printing or additive manufacturing in terms of metallic printing. But that's their goal. If they succeed in that goal, they say they can build a rocket within 2 months. They can just start their machines and start building rockets. And they have some of the biggest additive manufacturing machines. And the interesting part about this company is one of the co-founders came from Blue Origin, and the other one came from SpaceX. So these aren't dummies. And they've gotten a bunch of venture capitalism, and they haven't launched yet. So the proof's in the pudding, but they're going for it. In the case of the holy grail of rockets, and I'll just ask that, does anybody, you guys, what do you think the holy grail of making a more viable, financially viable rocket is? Any idea?
If people want to put their answers in the chat, I'll read them out.
Okay, I'll let you read them, but
100% reusability.
that's exactly right. So the holy grail right now is landing the second stage. So when you see Starship and you see stainless steel, he's going after the holy grail. And it'll be interesting to see if Blue Origin does that with New Glenn. So 100% reusability is the right answer. Yep. And it's also rocket fuel that is not complicated. So hydrogen, although hydrogen and oxygen is the highest ISP you can get from rocket fuel, it's hydrogen. You got to get hydrogen from somewhere, and you got to break it down into hydrogen. So using natural gas, for example, makes better sense.
Christopher also suggests reusable single stage to orbit. I don't know if you've
That's also the holy grail, and we haven't been able to do it. So I would say the National Space Plane, which came out in the early 2000s, the idea is it took off like a plane and went into orbit. We just weren't able to get there yet. So you're going to need, if you could do this, you're going to need better material science. You're going to need something that is conductive, is light, and is strong.
Are you familiar with the Skylon from the UK? But you may not have heard it. No.
No.
It's like an air-breathing jet engine, but it's supposed to be able to go into LEO orbit, I think.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, there is advances in, hypersonic vehicles. There's no question they're getting farther along in that area. It's going to have to be an adaptive engine, though. The engine will have to be adaptive. Or they use, which I think is the best way to go. You take an engine that works in atmosphere and an engine works in space. So it's an adaptive engine through that whole regime. The other way to do that is a separate set of engines for takeoff and landing, and a separate engine in space. That's not quite as unique. So yeah, a lot of engineering there to be done.
Yeah,
One of our
Ray J,
colleagues.
I heard something about the new Glen just in the last day or two that they're talking about making the upper stage reusable and stainless steel. So it might sound familiar.
Mhm. Yep, that's a rumor. I can't confirm it or deny it, but yeah, it was unclear to everyone why Elon went for stainless because it's 5 times more heavy, but it's starting to show why.
That's really interesting. I did my dissertation on combustion chambers and rockets, and all of my research shows that stainless steel is not the best option. So obviously you know something I don't.
Yeah, we made an analysis of that and came to the same conclusion when I was at Blue, but we'll see what happens here. But it is cheap, so let's get back to the money end of it. You know, I'll go back to my original statement. Build something that is economically viable first, and then you can get fancy.
So I've got one more thought about it. If there's any more questions from the audience, can't see it at the moment. I was just wondering. I wondering how quickly we're gonna switch over from a lot of highly trained, highly specialized people going into low Earth orbit or further to more of the average person going, other than just space tourists, perhaps. How quickly do you see all that happening?
I think you're going to need multiple, like half a dozen companies that can get humans to low Earth orbit. So until you get that, it's going to be difficult to get a bunch of people up there. The hard part of that that I learned in the New Shepard rocket was the environmental control system is very hard. It's harder than the human part of adding to a rocket is very difficult. You know, humans got to breathe. They got to, you know, they have waste. They got to have water. And so that part of it makes it much more difficult. So I think on some of these missions where they go zipping around the moon, you know, the space expedition, or even the ones in the Crew Dragon, they're going to find out the difficulty of that. It'll be a great ride, and they'll have the great views, and probably have to do no mission. You know, they won't have a mission per se. They'll get to look outside, which is not what we did in the space shuttle. But there's still those challenges of keeping the human alive.
In fact, the session we've just had just before this, there was exactly on that, and it was revealed how challenging that adding the human was. So yeah, very valid. Sonny, we've just trickled over the original planned time. I don't know how. I'm obviously quite happy to keep the gentlemen chatting as long as we can keep them, but
no, I just want to maybe wrap this up by saying thank you, BK and Ray J, for giving us some of your time. You guys have a wealth of experiences that it benefits us to hear, and you guys being willing to share is fantastic. You know, I get the benefit of seeing you guys on a pretty regular basis, so it's fantastic for this to happen where I get to see a bunch of other people get to hear your stories and be inspired by your guys' journey. And it's neat to hear all these wonderful, wise things that you're telling them, right? To study hard, be humble, hungry, people savvy, be excellent in anything you do. And then BK, I'll add something that you say routinely that I think is important maybe for people to remember. The pronouns of choice should always be we, us, and our, right? Not me, mine, I, right? I think that's really important as well. So, but anyway, thank you guys for your time today. I know that it's great for the class and the kiddos, and I hope Rob and Amelia, you guys enjoyed it too as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you very much. In fact, in the chat there's now coming up with a lot of thanks from various people on the audience, so much appreciated. Excellent to hear.
All right.
Yeah,
Well, thank you all very much.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I wanted to add one more thing to the last question. When's it going to be get a bunch of people into space? The New Shepard rocket was the 12th vehicle to take humans above the Kármán line. So If you add 3 Russians and, a Chinese and, Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Space Shuttle, Spaceship One, that's all we've had in the years that we've gone to space. So it's pretty small list. We really need to get that to be, 3 or 4 dozen. So lots of work ahead for young people to put their careers on and their efforts into that. So, but thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay. And more thank yous coming in on the chat. I don't know if you can actually see the chat screen or not, but
yeah, they
Yeah.
jump up. Yeah. So that's
Yeah,
great.
we see them. That's awesome.
yeah.
All
Well,
right.
work hard, have fun, people.
All
Thank you
right.
very much.